Right, Jane? I think that it should be right now. Sure, starting with the Heart Sutra. All right, let's do it. Breathe in and do it. Oh, where did the prayers go? Just a second.
I prostrate the arm to gently dust the
Here at one time.
my body is growing in massive Bodhisattva and Russia create together a great community of lights and a great community of disciples. At that time, the body was absorbed in the concentration of the categories of the mind.
Called profound perception. Also at that time,
Put upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those
5 ideas also is empty of inherent nature.
then
Through the power of the features of this Bodhisattva the son of the living train wishes to practice the activities of the profound perfection of wisdom. It is said that the Bodhisattva Shariputra, and the son of the major daughter of the village, wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom. Should open up my life, please correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 ideas also is empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is lost. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition, practice, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristic. Unceased, not without stain, not definition, not fulfilled.
Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness.
There is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition, no practice, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomenon.
There is no I element,
Up to including no mind element and no mental consciousness. There is no ignorance, no extension of ignorance, and so on, up to including no engagement, death, and no extension of well-being. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exhaustive wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas environment, dwell in perfection and wisdom. The mind without obscuration, without fear, having completely passed beyond error to reach the end point of Nirvana. All the Buddhas of the world 3 times also are manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment, and so on perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom
the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra of the pacifies all suffering should be known as truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Gati Gati Paragati Prasamati Bodhisattva. Sharipusha, the Bodhisattva Master, is trained in calm, perfection, peace, and love. Then the Bhagavan rose in Lord's concentration, commended the Bodhisattva Master, Aya Avalokiteshvara. Well said. Lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the final perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rituals. The Bhagavan has the venerable Bodhisattva Master, and those surrounding the world, humans, the spirits, and the joy. I prostrate to the gathering of the Dakinis in the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of missing space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical illumination, look after practitioners like a knowledge. By the teachings of the Supreme Lords possessing the power of truth, may the inner and outer hindrances be transformed. May there be may all negative forces opposed to the Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with Dharma, and may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here right now. Aji Sanji Chodam Soke Chonama Chancho Bhakti Dhammi Dhammi Bhagi Chushi Giga Tona Yolam Deshi Sankin Dubara Sanji Chodam Soke Chonama Chancho Bhakti Dhammi Dhammi Bhagi Chushi Giga Tona Yolam Deshi Sankin Dubara Sanji Chodam Soke Chonama Chancho Bhakti Dhammi Dhammi Bhagi Chushi Giga Tona Yolam Deshi Sankin Dubara 한기 도진이 손에 따와 동지 동비처럼 동비춘 땡기 거듭 제라 찬세로 Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Geshe.
Good morning, Geshe.
Good morning. Only the change. Today we something they give us something to do. Today we are starting with the 8th chapter from Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva of Life. The chapter is on absorption. Tachidang level 2, more with level 3, then level 2 nangi. Kicheshu chaviaris ra something level down. Ani shiruk level nidda kicheshu chavianza ani 당한 상황보다 간토도 그 리버드미 아니 Of the 10 chapters in Shantidev's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, this chapter is the most important one. Actually, together with the chapter on wisdom, these two comprise of the most important chapters in this manuscript. So today, as we begin with chapter number 8, please make sure that your mind is focused as much as you can concentrate on this chapter because it is of vital importance. So I'll just put a text on the screen. All right, so in looking at the beginning of the commentary with respect to chapter number 8, it comes under the heading of the way of training in the mental stabilization contained in the common and uncommon types of common abiding. So mental stabilization is another translation for the term Tsultrim in Tibetan, which normally I translate as absorption, right? So either mental stabilization or absorption. Here it says that it is contained in the common and uncommon types of calm abiding. This is to say that there is a type of calm abiding that is shared between Buddhists and non-Buddhists. So as sometimes we refer to Buddhists and non-Buddhists, the insiders and outsiders. So there's a practice of calm abiding that is shared between those two sides, but there is also one that is specific or unique to the Buddhist tradition. So there are calm abidings which are shared with non-Buddhists and those which are specific to Buddhists. So to begin with, in terms of the nature of calm abiding, which is concentration, exists in the mind stream of Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike. So there are non-Buddhist practitioners. In a Buddhist terminology, they might be called tirthikas, which means those non-Buddhist philosophers which practice concentration. So calm abiding in the nature of concentration exists in the mind stream of some of them. Also, concentration exists in the mind stream of Buddhists. So you can say that from the point of view of being concentration, that is calm abiding, it is shared between Buddhists and non-Buddhists. Now, when we look at calm abiding that is specific or unique to Buddhists, we look at calm abiding from the viewpoint of the object of observation that is used for the cultivation of calm abiding. So there are unique or specific objects of observations that are used in a Buddhist context for the cultivation of calm abiding. So that's one thing that makes this calm abiding unique. And the other thing is from the viewpoint of what accompanies or assists the development of calm abiding. So particularly from the viewpoint of this tradition, what accompanies the development of calm abiding is mind generation. Also, from that perspective, it is a unique calm abiding.
어디래자 린자 베나 친한 토모와 세디 미바드 토모와산 베나 땅안 주지 아니 랑길 lunga yisumraw yang pigi kamsum jawdi ani devadi kam komani lateni ani ragbai batan kam komani lateni dungar ma yipidi ta chaji yoros o dinti la minda samden gombadi ani chinan tumowi samdi yo din nambala ye yunguyore ani chirobala da zu pagi pigi ta chik samden ko zu di something worship to Kalia, Shini to the and it's Sharanam Jinki, and Jigden Lam Seti, and it comes soon be Nang, that Devadi, and it come Tambuni the Tenita, Rava, the Dungama in the Tindi Chalamini, and it's something congruous. Young Diosaris.
So, from the point of view of the absorption that is common to both Buddhists and non-Buddhists, you can employ object of observations which are common to both Buddhists and non-Buddhists. Like, for example, you can focus on body, speech, and mind as objects of observations for the cultivation of shamatha, common body. Or another meditation technique is to look at the three realms which cover cyclic existence and to observe the desire realm as being cause and the higher realms, form and the formless realm, as being the aspect of peace. So looking at the cause levels of the desire realm, not only the things that are enjoyed are coarser, but also there are more afflictions and disturbances or difficulties in the desire realm. So this practice of absorption, where you cultivate calm abiding, in which you look at the cause levels of the lower level, such as, for example, the desire realm, and the peaceful aspects of the upper levels, such as, for example, the higher realms, is a meditation technique that is a main meditation technique employed by non-Buddhist practitioners, but also it can be used by Buddhist practitioners as a way of cultivating absorption that is calm abiding.
Na ani tan nambi thong moi ba ta chu mi ba bena denj ta chu du la so ba ning ni shini drejeros ta di ani nambi thong moi ba cha de ma do ani chirebi gi ra ta ji ani number mai bi gi ani ta chulo go chu gi denjin ta chu du nam sa di telam ba tam ba gi maros. But then
when you look at objects of observations for the cultivation of shamatha, which are unique to Buddhists, for example, the 16 aspects of the four truths, aspects such as impermanence. So employing such objects of observation for the cultivation of calm abiding will be done only by Buddhists. Meditating on the 16 aspects of the four truths, aspects such as impermanence, would not be done by non-Buddhists.
Is a shini givada, Langdong give some days language members Gavita, shini give the Langdong give us down. In Jimmy, you some temple shoe telia, and the thing is the shini inquire maros, share of each other, yon chogoras, and indeed the two and dicka share and shini give something. And something they give you color, shini give something shigres. 아니 셰르시온 kalaya 상동 gibi samde sungrisana lakshograsro.
Again, looking at the title of this section, the way of training in the mental stabilization or absorption. By the way, the word for that in Sanskrit is dhyana, for those of you who've heard that word before. So the way of training in dhyanas or absorptions, mental stabilization, which refers to minds that are very stable, contained in the common and uncommon types of calm abiding. So just looking at the way of stating the title of this section. So you might just a second, I just need to clarify something. Shinegi dube samtense du la
신이 무기 상대서 신이 상대서 샤초는.
So one way of reading this title is to give rise to the doubt whether if it's an absorption, is it necessarily karma binding? Can you also speak about absorptions which are not karma binding? If it's an absorption, does it have to be karma binding? So it doesn't have to be karma binding, Geshe reckons, because you can also say that there are other things which are subsumed under the banner of absorption or considered to be an absorption, which are not necessarily the concentration that is karma binding. Like, for example, special insight, which is taught by the next chapter, the chapter on wisdom, the way to develop wisdom that is a specific type of wisdom, special insight wisdom. So you can develop the wisdom to the point of view in which it also subsumed under the banner of absorption. So you could have an absorption that is karma binding, but you can also have an absorption which is in the aspect of wisdom, in the nature of wisdom.
네, 나디 this also tell ya that levi and levi give shonsheba ta levi give sen tambo shonsheba la sum something gomba tamba something the shini give something gomba tamba ta shini give mintin chok pamba shini chedar ko sulos tambo something gomba la tamba la ni shini drug ginzen ta shini give mintin chok pamba tamba was.
So then in explaining the way to train in the concentration included in the common and uncommon karma binding concentrations or absorptions, in explaining the chapter's material, we're going to look at three main points. The first one is instructions on cultivating concentration or absorption. Then the second point would be abandoning the class of things incongruous with karma binding. And the third point would be how to cultivate karma binding. Now, when we begin with the first point, which is instructions on cultivating absorption, there are 2 points in that section. The reason why it is necessary to accomplish karma binding and instructions on abandoning the class of things incongruous with karma binding.
그래서 신이 drugu 균전 쏘디 신이 drugu 균전 쏘디 다 가복기 난주다 전주 제모라 전주 순간자 잔주 셈 미버 탈도버디 아니 비 탈위 고모점이 봐 아니 탐진김이 공부 들고 위해서 다 탐진김이 공부 들어봐야 아니 지 바르 주지 쏘디 친구 기디비 다지 남도 디디 아니 차거라서 디 아니 디까고면서 디까는 디니고 쏘디다 아니 신이 차거서 아니 신이 들고 이제 쏘 데레스라다 저는 데려왔어.
So we begin with receiving instructions for cultivating absorption. And the instruction to meditate on absorption are given here because when we look at this text, the great guide on a Bodhisattva's way of life, it deals with the development of bodhicitta, not just for the sake of attaining one's own liberation, but for the sake of attaining the state of omniscience, the state of Buddha. And in order to attain the state of omniscience, we need to eliminate all the things which are obstacles for the cultivation of omniscience, such as, for example, conceptions associated with laxity and excitations. Since laxity and excitations are obstacles for the cultivation of omniscience, here chapter number 8 explains the way to develop the concentration that is coming within the banner of absorption in order to eliminate those obstructions.
Tere dezata di tindigi shine di zu gyokal dengolstan di ta kazenge mamanta level dumba draw sawainza level dumbi kawla ya tsar di zongju la den ra zongju gi ani tengin zu dribala ya ani chi drobi zongju gi sem den ta ani tengin zu drogo res ta ra sem pigi ta chi nibala ya ani shine islaundi Migwalaya, Chichi Nebita, and Tengin to Jugores, that are soon beginning in Tengins in the shadow set.
Now, from the viewpoint of the causes for the development of common abiding, they follow from chapter number 7. So in chapter number 7 in this guide, we spoke of the development of joyous effort. So the development of enthusiasm about virtue, we then transition to the development of common abiding, which is assisted by the enthusiasm about virtue, which is what verse number 1 in this chapter says. So looking at verse number 1, it says, having developed joyous effort in that way, I should place my mind in meditative stabilization.
Here, any things like Shavalaya, and ye things like Mashava, some number young Muchi Tanani said, Kedzi ye things like Shamatuna, and it same pigata, Chingui Shaman, Son, never enough, then in younger Chimbu Shujiris, Tamji Kimu Komba Pashami, Tari Kombatsami, Dentruzania, Totuk Maris, Bena, Pigita. Jenzingi chewe partu chudingi ani soden taw ra jenzingi chewe partu chudingi soden ta be ani keji thema thaw be ta chi ani so choya ta mijing soraj yoro binan shin da ani chagdangi ani shamang chudingi ani soden di ani denju da tharba da denju soksa chechini ani ta Nansong here, the Ningashu Gallery, there is Nimuchi Tandanis.
So as we begin with instructions on cultivating concentration or absorption, we begin with the reason why it is necessary to accomplish common abiding, and there are 6 lines in that section. So we read through the first 2 lines. Let's look at verse 1 in total. Having developed joyous effort in that way, I should place my mind in meditative stabilization or in concentration. Now, here it's going to be a little bit confusing when we cover chapter number 8, because there are different terms which are different translations for the word absorption or dhyana, and different translation for the word tingenzin in Sanskrit.
Sorry, what was the second one?
The second term is samadhi, not in samadhi, right? So dhyana and samadhi, those 2 terms are used in the Sanskrit language or in Tibetan Samten and Tingenzin. There are different translations to them, and they create a lot of confusion. We'll try to work it out later on. But anyway, it says here, the man whose mind is distracted dwells between the fangs of the afflictions. So the point in developing concentration is not only for the development of the state of enlightenment, the state of omniscience, but also if you want to be liberated, you need concentration. And even more so, if you want to avoid miserable states of existence and attain a pleasant state of rebirth, even for that you need concentration, because a person who is susceptible by the afflictions is like a person whose life force is about to be severed by being caught between the fangs of a wild beast. As it says here, a man whose mind is distracted dwells between the fangs of the afflictions.
namdole dobalaya lu ya and chikri the suggestion is a dunjin pinjile and ember machina and it's same namdole dowaiti namdole tambo kalakash chagwanza and it lu the same ember number yon jones number yon jungi tachi and tap and namdole tambo ya tap tambo di and loosen empathy is loosen same empathy and namdodi nangi period shiach yungres.
So we need to overcome our afflictions or those disturbing conceptions in order to develop concentration. And in order to be able to overcome those coarse levels of conceptions, discursive conceptions, what we need to do is to isolate our body and mind, because so long as our body is still susceptible to all the hustle and bustle of this world, to frivolous entertainment and so forth, for that long it would be difficult to prevent different types of conceptions from arising in our mind. And so long as we have those conceptions running through our mind, for that long it would be hard to develop concentration. So we need to isolate the mind isolate our body from different, from the hustle and bustle of this world, but also we need to isolate the mind from certain conceptions which impede the development of concentration. So altogether here, particularly for beginners, when you take up the practice of cultivating, you need to isolate your body and mind from things that create disturbances for the cultivation of cultivating.
Then David Namaya, Harsheva Tether Gevala to two beginnings, big things in the shower chat, Chingu is number you. And me, Numumba, Jensen, do watch in the day, Chivi Tana, native, can you do Jimmy source? Now each other points not, Luda Sam, Junzenda, David Namdoso, the Ember, ye, things in the number Jumos.
As it says in the first two lines of verse 2, through isolation of body and mind, no distractions will occur. Looking at Yetsuda Marinchen's commentary to this section, it says, having generated enthusiasm that delights in virtue, as explained before, one should place the mind in concentration, because a person whose mind is distracted by mental sinking and excitement abides in a cave of the fangs of a malevolent animal and will be quickly destroyed by them. If it is asked, how does one abandon mental wandering? Through isolating body and mind from distraction and desirous thoughts, one will not develop mental wandering, the opposing factors to concentration.
Because there is that Dindiki Shinigi Mintin Chosenanja and that Nami Goba or Senanja that D and it comes to the Goba Sungus. Shinigi Mintucho, Pambar Dampi Shivika, let Hambu on the chin. And it shinny dumiji. Let Hambo, Tavalaya, Semni Tambot on the ya, nearly Kalikamu Kalaya, and so Kagoyadi, Gobachagas, Gobat. Then that Chishini Pigita, Semni Guyori, Tadinia, Leoni, and Yan Chiwaka Goy, so Chagoy soba. And near Leoni, that big Sempanium Shagoyadi. And so Chagoy soba. Indian gold, let Hambo Kalaya. So Goba Kagoza, Goba Yosaki, Chasan Yosa, so deep, and he that Seven Temanaji, Tevis, that and Lucid Embaten, that Nando, Dunju Togonza, Kiesagishi, Kevin, Chigden Panshi, number Toba, Yos Toro said.
There are different obstacles for the development of cultivating, but here the main one that is emphasized is distraction and mental wandering. So looking at also the way that the text addresses that, it seems that it addresses that from the viewpoint of how, as a beginner, you take up the practice of calm abiding. And as a beginner, the thing that creates an obstacle for the development of concentration that is calm abiding is excitation or mental wandering. Particularly when you look at that from the viewpoint of the 9 stages of mental abidings, which are the stages that we go through in the cultivation of calm abiding. The first one, that is called mental placement or mental abiding. The first thing that you need to battle with as a beginner is mental wandering. Then you progress through the 9 stages of the cultivation of mental abidings in the cultivation of calm abiding. And then comes a time in which you need to address predominantly mental laxity or mental sinking. And later on, you'll also need to place the mind in an even state, in a state of equanimity. But that will come later on as your practice of the cultivation of calm abiding is developed. To begin with, as beginner, the thing that will predominate is mental wandering, distraction or excitation. So therefore, when we look at the way that Shantideva explains that in looking at the next point, which comes out of the heading of instructions on abandoning the class of things incongruous with calm abiding. The first thing that is pointed out as being incongruous with calm abiding is this distraction. So it says in the last 2 lines in verse number 2, therefore I should abandon the world and completely discard conceptualizations.
Pangsashin said, Gunzin Terenas, Jevena, Gunzin Terena, and the Lu Dunzile Engo Yardan, Sam Namdoli, MB, Tap Zodi, and Gagin Pongoenza, Gagin di, Tangam Jigden Base, Jigden B, that Landor Ne, and Jugmutungi, and send it some motto. Samlong Korea meeting into Kala Chagi or Islandi, and it's same dig that and Zuda to Rejal Soba, or Tindi Chilaya, and Chan, be touching Dunzin, Tindi touching, and in the ship, and Jigding touching, and it longevity, Pangogres, Telia Chakshin Torgores, Rotso, Telia Chakshin Torgores, this one was Tit Torbaina. And Namdo Kisaki, Shimevaina, Namdo, Pita, Nangi Todrech, Yungioras.
So looking at the commentary to these 2 lines, it begins with saying, hence, through the method of physical isolation, one abandons distractions such as meeting with worldly friends, relatives, and so forth. So we begin with the method of physical isolation, in which we isolate our body from frivolous entertainment or from all the hustle and bustle of this world. In recognizing that it might be that as beginners, a beginning point is not knowing precisely or not knowing at all what we need to take up and what we need to cast aside. And our orientation to practice would be that we mainly focus on things that belong to this lifetime only. Which means that to a great degree, we are affected by discursive conceptions which are focused on things that belong to this lifetime only. So here it says that for such beginners to begin with, you need to create a certain level of physical isolation in which you remove the basis for the arisal of such discursive conceptions. So you need to find a situation or to isolate yourself from a situation in which you need to find a situation in which you are isolated from objects that give rise to attachment and clinging and so forth. For that end, you need physical isolation.
There is a Namdo Jesaki, Shich, that's Lava Chansa, let's have a Jella, and Namdo di Doya Kalakabush, Kaduna, Namasanji, we shown Kitchen, Samamulaya, Namdo di Lava Chansa Meguch, and so go at the kitchen bush, Segados, on the tower Tartu, what then a paper Kadunia, Dam ever said it. 유코란 띵 자원이니다 아니 니규 매바 티 문지야 조디 남도도 붙여드려서 그게 비다 당진기 왕기 유팅이 지 여버다고 지 샤츠를 제려야 아니 람상 비게 아니 차당기 비 라바 창초초 소리지 내대와지 유팅이 자원이 매바디 니바니 온디 아니 차당기 섬매바 차야디 유팅이 니바 매바 니바인자 디그레도 디자 먼저 다 딘지기 따왔다는 표마도 바이나 다 차바기서 유다 아니 카다랑 붙이야지 내 당보래요 개치주 디직차고서레스
If those objects of attachment and so forth are within the reach of your hand, if you can just reach and grab them, it would be so hard to rid yourself of such discursive conceptions. If everything is so readily for us to grasp onto with our hands, so long kind of as soon as you reach out to them, those discursive conceptions arise in your mind. So from that perspective, or for that reason, it is so important to begin with to make sure that we do not come in contact with those objects. This is something that you can see that is so common in Buddhist teachings, to make sure that to begin with, we do not find ourselves in situations where those objects that give rise to such conceptions are within the reach of our hands. And also, when you take this idea onto more advanced teachings, like for example, the teachings on selflessness, where you're looking for a certain imputed object and you cannot find it, what you're doing is that you're saying that so long as you do encounter objects which are within the reach of your hand that you can contact, with a sense of grasping at the self, on that basis, attachment and anger and so forth inevitably will arise. So what we want to do in order then to make sure that does not occur, that those discursive conceptions, anger, attachment, and so forth do not arise, to begin with, we make sure that we do not find ourselves in situations where they are within the reach of our hand, that we can contact them.
아니 현재 제사기에 아니 비다지 아니 김탑을 써봤다 지겨졌다 니이와도 써봤다 아니 그 포트로 써봤다 딘디지어바는 가드는 샘텔을 차지 아니 지 땡이지 샘티지 내세 가고 쇼지 레도스 이제 딘디 상담에 딘디 상담에나 당원이 지 비다 람도 좋은 거야 지 람종 포모 땡디 자친구 임바디 아니 오늘 최남다 지고 거기야 믹스 genzen 친구 여버지 통통살아서 좋아.
So looking at the things that give rise to attachment and clinging, when you look at those who are close to your heart, your family members, your parents, your children, your friends, and so forth, these are those things that we find in our immediate surrounding that so easily give rise to attachment and clinging. So therefore, from the point of view of developing calm abiding, in developing physical isolation, and particularly when you think of creating this situation that you find conducive for the cultivation of calm abiding, concentration is calm abiding, it's so important to become, for example, ordained. This is such a precious situation where you're creating those conditions which make it suitable for you to develop states such as calm abiding.
인자 간지간 저 아니 비기 아니 착신 기사기 시 아니 두종은 짐토니 아니 디다 야르무 제거야 비기 다지 아니 나무 지사산서 부투도서 다 딘킴다면서 디 내가 있냐 베나랍도 중요가 있냐 지금다 둔질을 써봐 지금 아니 벤줄을 써봐 딘디 시우질이야 아니 지금 샘차되와나 지금 양소로지 그러나 아니 샘 남도래 탈마트래 샘 비기 남도기 지야를 지금 주용 상대기로 이거 도 상대거야 아니 현재 도진 도저는 인구 매버 조 됐다 오는 딩거리 조 님보 메바디 고 아니 단 유초초 이게 자우님 메비 지금 메다비 내서도 소거디 무유 내수기 아니 리비 토네다 아니 대연 그 차바께서 유라야 이데 메바 어 딘디친 송고도 왔으라
So preventing situations where those in our immediate surrounding could give rise to anger and could give rise to attachment and clinging in our mind stream. But it's not that if you became ordained and you find that your family member, children, parents, partner, friends, and so forth are not around you, it's not that that's enough to create those conditions which are conducive for the cultivation of that practice, which is the practice of calm abiding. It might be that those that could trigger attachment and clinging are not around you, and still you're involved with the hustle and bustle of this world. You still have a greater degree of attachment and clinging to wealth and money and so forth. And so long as you have that for that long, you will still have those conditions which are not conducive to the cultivation of calm abiding. So then in order also to reduce that and to prevent attachment and clinging with respect to the hustle and bustle and wealth and so forth of this world from arising, you need to think that they have no essence. You might have enjoyments, you might have money, wealth, and so forth, but those things have no essence. They readily change. They are susceptible to change. They are not stable. And as such, you're creating that physical isolation in which you isolate yourself from the objects that give rise to attachment and clinging. You see that they have no essence.
So we say in things like money and maybe technology. It seems like Geshe was saying you can have those, but it's important to see that they're independent. If you don't see that, you're still caught up in the hustle and bustle.
So then, with respect to money and technology, mobile phones and so forth, maybe you can still have them, but as Geshe said, you need to see that they have no essence, that they're not stable. Even if you have them, if you if you see that they have no essence, that they not stability, there's nothing that you can rely upon, then you don't regard them, or they don't act for you as the hustle and bustle of this world. Just on the Peja Benjor Kabar Dilasopa says Kesi Sosola Yonayam Tadila Dinya Bayomare, Item Bayomare, Item Yomare, Nimbo Yomare, somebody Nayan, then the duty shida Tigimarwa, so Semna Chashen Shida Makena Jigarebes. Didn't Yana Jigarebes.
Jigarebes, so the piggy, Jigdem Pongore said the Betty, any Samuel Sogor said Revelas, Kagolan on Jigdin Yongo was, Kagolan Jigdin Yongo was that. Tanda Jigdem Pong said the Teria Shenja Toria. So Chadamakia. The Chadan shook Chimbo Yavaina. And the nigger doya said, Katarim with the entries in the mother. And Jig and Casota, Susula Shenja Mavaina. And a Benjo Yurching, Benjole Shenja Mavaina. And D and Shena Robachi, Eugene Tanchodas, Telago Gajaski Modas.
Yeah, it doesn't mean to say that we need then to rid ourselves of everything that we have, that we need to completely obliterate or destroy all the things that we have. So long as we have anger, so long as we have attachment and clinging, for that long we will still have disturbances or distractions in the cultivation of calm abiding. So if you don't have any attachments or clinging to those things, if they don't give rise to those thoughts in your mind, then it's all right to have them. It says, or actually, so it is said that sometimes it is said that you need to abandon the world. Sometimes it says that you need to protect the world. So that depends upon the context. If you're cultivating calm abiding, concentration that is calm abiding, and there are things that pose obstacles for the cultivation of calm abiding, such as, for example, those that give rise to conceptions of attachment and clinging and so forth, then it's good to stay away from them, to develop physical isolation, or to remove yourself from a situation where you come in contact with the things and thereby they give rise to those conceptions in your mind. If you don't have attachment and clinging to those things, and you still have them, money, possessions, and so forth, actually you can use them for the benefit of others.
Redadi chidanga ngada kalakabu dosra ki taji shenja thorse inya taji samya kuch pena tande samdin sonya zodia ani chik sherab churab namji yaguch yonyak chedo samdin dugiyorasra churab namji gi sherab yaguch yobaina ani khari yobaina ya kyunchi samares penan decha yobaina ya Geshe dipigi ani chik shendun chibigi yanala gyurtu yoga soba ani shedan yobayne ya dig on ma soba ani shendun chibi yanala gyurtu yoga soba ani chagin shin kari yobayne ya sama shendun chibi yanala chera namaji namjugi lo yagu jobana ani dig ya tumbiken gyurtu yaji dan nganzo le tambo ngada ngada kalya shencha yobayna shencha gi on sonchini ani megivi len bashi le jugo mato ani shendele yurtu med samala ndi kala never dudini ani shenja magi echegi tabla bevgo yadi kichi jure jas tachi benjur ya shenja kan benjur le shenja mesela namgyule mendo doji senno le ya zachi shu dinzin dede bayna dayan dukshi chado dosra.
It is difficult to rid yourself of attachment and clinging. Geshe said that at least when he looks at his own mind, he still has attachment and clinging to things in his life. But when we look at this particular context where the practice of calm abiding is taught, and it is said that you need to remove yourself from a situation, to isolate yourself from a situation where where attachment and clinging arise. You do that in order to be able to develop wisdom that thoroughly distinguishes Dhamma. That's the point in developing a concentration that is calm abiding, so that on that basis you'd be able to develop wisdom that will thoroughly distinguish the Dhamma, that will thoroughly distinguish between phenomena. So if we don't have attachment and clinging, it doesn't matter whatever we might have in our possession, it will give us no problems. And if that occurs, then using a wisdom, or if there is no attachment or clinging to the things that we have in our possession, with wisdom, we can use even attachment as a branch for benefiting others. We can use other afflictive states of mind, whatever afflictive states of mind we have, jealousy or what have you, we can also use them as branches for the benefit of others. But it is hard for beginners, isn't it? Particularly because currently we still have a greater degree of attachment and clinging. So let alone not being able to benefit others with those states of mind, under the influence of attachment and clinging, we end up perform non-virtuous actions, negative actions, and we don't benefit others. So externally, we might behave as if we have no attachment to things that are in our possession. So we might claim that I have no attachment to money, I have no attachment to possessions, and yet innerly in our mind, we might still have this strong yearning or strong clinging to those things. So if we claim that we have no attachment, no clinging, and yet in our mind it's still kind of a really powerful attitude of clinging and attachment, only negative thing can come out of that rather than positive.
It seems like you have strong attachments to things. I've heard Geshe talk about this in the past that with the practice of calm body, you might get a certain way, but then it's possible that that strong attachment to something will arise early.
So you're saying that if you have a strong attachment to things, then with calm abiding, you can rid yourself of some level of attachment, but it can still arise. Is that what you're saying?
It seems in my mind that you have to develop some sort of concentration, but then those attachments that you still have strong attachments to things become an obstacle until you got up because they become force of those, like more strong.
So are you saying that kind of you can develop a certain level of concentration with the practice of calm abiding, but if you still have attachment and so forth, then they will still be there in a strong form. Do you say that also they can also become more powerful? Is that what you said at the end?
Yeah, or become bigger obstacles.
The attachment can become a bigger obstacle.
Yeah, because you might think, like it seems like Geshe was saying, that if you're deluding yourself when you go into like, I was to go on a retreat to your retreat to develop calm body, but I still have very big attachments to money or other things.
Mm.
It seems like I would start to develop some sort of concentration. But then it seems highly likely that those strong attachments would then come up in my mind later on as I get slower.
Okay.
Obstacles like, oh, my money, I've not got this money that I start to worry about it, and then the retreat doesn't go well.
Chizan kesi peja penjo dila sopalayan chakshen chembochi yanarwa kesi tingin zin shine tingin zin di gomtab chenaya di chashen di ma dorwa ina motunin kange namto ke yon sigirwes pena kesi peja ta penjo dila sopalayan chakshen chembochi shu chembochi yana lo ni shine tsamla dewa ina yan rakpa yama chamo goni peja dila kare chegore na peja kare chegore kare nyugore namto den dabchi yan yon sigirwes di parche chembo yon sigirwes
tabi piju kartamandang tagaran pigi tachi doyangi ya ani chakshin shukshin bu yabayna ani tenginzi dribtu ya sedi yongyam yabajire dos chidan dinima tungulesira di drewe na kar sondusrani tewe na lu embi tab jigdenbi nyenshi sotan chobin dunzu so pangwar chashin sem embi tab debi yonden number tobo so yonsu torba chawo dele sem number iwan namani jigdenbi samden yan keba kana lanami bi chanchu tachum hu teena lanami bi chanchu mato borde sem mi wa chagores chadang on maso wa chag chadende ani samde bi tachi ani komi sem pindi chagores tindi yongye chebaleya ani devi gi shancha ti ani thormatu wa na yons thormatu wa na ani ki mesri wajire dos ki mesri wajire sra.
if you still have, you might be doing a long retreat or long practice of calm abiding, but if you still have such thoughts like, what will I do with my money? What will I buy with my money? What will I be able to get with my wealth and so forth? It means that you still have those conceptions that create distraction in your practice of calm abiding. So it's still a problem. Looking at what Geshe Rinchen says, in his commentary. Hence, through the method of physical isolation, one abandons distractions such as meeting with worthy friends, relatives, and so forth. Through the method of isolating the mind, one perfectly destroys thoughts for desired objects. Now, desired objects can also be understood to be objects which are associated with the desire realm. So when we cultivate calm abiding, we cultivate the higher realm mind. When we attain calm abiding, we attain the higher realm mind. So looking at the objects that we enjoy now, we enjoy objects of enjoyments which are associated with the desired realm. And without overcoming, without abandoning the attachment and clinging that we have to those objects of enjoyments that belong to the desired realm, which are called desired objects, for that long, we'll not be able to attain calm abiding. Just a second, I'm not sure that I read everything here. So from Sutra, it says if it is rare for a distracted mind to even attain a worthy mental stabilization, then what need is there to mention complete enlightenment? Therefore, one should not let one's mind be distracted until the attainment of complete enlightenment. So,
I was just going to say that, first of all, this teaching is, what Geshe would think, this teaching is if you're going into strict retreat. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the practice of calm abiding actually helps you to overcome those attachments. So if you're really doing it properly, then down the track, those attachments disappear slowly. If you're really doing calm abiding, it's the nature of the practice to overcome that. So yes, in the beginning, you need to be really strict if you're going into strict retreat. But then if you're doing that practice properly, then your mind becomes much more subdued, and you counteract excitation, you counteract laxity, and naturally those things fall away.
I wonder if people at home have had this question. Do I need to repeat it? Had it. All right, cool. So people that hear, did you hear, by the way, did you hear Sharab's question? Not quite. All right, so I'll repeat it for the people here.
You can remember it by heart.
Yeah. So there were a couple of questions here. First of all, it seems that is Geshe here speaking about this scenario where you go into strict retreat, of cultivating calm abiding, and for that end, you need to rid yourself of this attachment and clinging. So that's one question. All the objects that bring that up. Yeah, or to isolate yourself from all the objects that bring that up. So that's the first question. The second question is that, but it seems that also if you have a good practice of calm abiding in retreat, then also those attachment and clinging to those things will naturally subside, or will naturally kind of be reduced. So that is something that comes along through the stage of the retreat. The more you persist with that retreat, the kind of more weaker or lesser those sense of attachment, clinging, and those sense of conception become. So that is also, you can say, an outcome of the retreat.
Yeah, if you're doing it properly, then the excitation will reduce, therefore the distractions and the conceptions reduce.
If you're doing it properly, then excitation will abate, and thereby will be reduced, and thereby also attachment and so forth. Dila the chua niores. Yeah. Tade dila deshe daran di gyabdorwa pena lugi wemba se di chejena samla de kecharwa pena samla de shine gomba shine druba de kecharwa. Chua Tambodire. Kind of Pesha Kurantio de Carasana, Mazo Sansan de Nima Rajilian, test in the Chigro. In a cup de la Mixegi Samla de Chigirawas, the Chiratambo. Chira Nivadian, Kesi Shine Yabo Gombaina, Gyun Rimbo, Penatsamla den Shine Gombaina, Yan Dilatene, Soson Namto Shoot Churu Done Yan Dilatene, Chapa Tan Shemba Dian, Shuk Churu Dograwas, Chesan Den Tambola, then the Wemba Goyan the Chachen Makiache du Sogerwa. Dine Samyabo de one, Yabogona, Dian Chachen Churu Drug Double Dendo, she Togerwas.
탑지 유기로 jes 당한주 something dogoris laungi something dogor thing is gomgoris laungi gom kyagi abata shisha shegoras ro minganzu namji tachi yondra 그 참세 다와치 비니 데스 딘디 참마인 바치 간지 타바도 탐지 캠바 되니 지금 원이 아니 신내다 항동생이 메타매직을 해봤어 다시 langtongkiya di ngundu da shini semtsejin nebi tengin go wainza and didru go gres da tengin zi noyagi gajin chini zo de karsawandi chiwan da goba singi chiwan da goba di kani yungurs landi pena gobi pena tachi chaksam tawadi zo dunzin la ten yungu yabadi siu shuros inza ta le thambo wala ya thambo nipi chaksam di and never so sim kalakha shuras in the chaksam no sa bigi shikhoran da pe and khata rimbuchin deyati sam keji chigu mai ba ganji sozu mezid namale taw mada yupardi chik chagdan kesagi jeda khata rimbuchi yadi lün dunzel ensedi telekogo desra.
So then when we speak of the cultivation of calm abiding here and here, the instructions that are given are with respect to meditating on calm abiding, cultivating calm abiding, cultivating special insight and so forth. They're not given in the context of doing short-term practices. Like, for example, you might go into retreat for a month or two and develop calm abiding. This is not the focus of these instructions. The focus of these instructions is for someone that have resolved that they are going to attain the state of enlightenment, that they are going to attain the state of liberation. So a person that has that as a goal, this is what they're interested in, the attainment of liberation and the state of enlightenment. That person needs to develop special insight and calm abiding. So a person that needs to attend us to meditate on the states for the sake of liberation and enlightenment needs first of all to meditate on calm abiding, because in order to develop special insight, they need to do it on the basis of calm abiding. And if they need to begin with calm abiding, if they're beginners, what they need to do at the beginning is to isolate themselves from hustle and bustle of this world, or from other things that give rise to attachment and clinging and so forth. So when you understand it like that, it's not limited only to a retreat. It's like if you think about it yourself, if in your life, your spiritual goal is to then continue with a practice that will help you at the end to attain the state of liberation and the state of enlightenment, even within your life, you need to look at how you start to isolate yourself from things that give rise to attachment and clinging, to create this scenario or environment by which physically as beginner, you're more removed from objects that would otherwise give rise to attachment and clinging in your mind. So if you can create a lifestyle where you're more isolated from the hustle and bustle of the world, you're more isolated from those things that give rise to attachment and clinging. As practitioners, not only in retreat, but as practitioners, it would be more conducive for pursuing the practices, the meditation on the practices that lead to the state of enlightenment and liberation.
There is the Lun Dunzili Embachieri, that couldn't do the and sent Namtol, 비 차단 도시들에서 이제 신이기 가게조디 아니 차바치 이용하지 이 나니까 아니 데빈 대차다고 아니 쭉 차게 왔어요. 그쭉 차게 연서 다 지정이 단주시원하지 찍다. 난수 저기 같이 아니 대시 내로가 소바 아니 지금 메다비 내서도 소바 딘지 일 상니 아니 비기 율라야 차단 도투에 지금 여바이나 아니 둔진레 털고 말이스 지속 간다지 끼래 신자 간다지 끼래 대바이네야 차라스지 가르 가리 여바이네야 그 메다비 내서다 비기 지 아니 둥하게 란신 바기 내수 시비 또 다란기 아니 차단기에 된 거를 뒀어 다 디삼마투 비까야 메다비 내수디야 치마지 삼마투 아니 둥하게 란신 바디야 삼마투 비기 다지 이용 초디 비까야 아니 율 텔레바 엠바체디 야슈이지긴 서비스 요
So this state of isolation here is taught for the sake of abandoning anger, attachment, and so forth in our mind. Particularly when we cultivate calm abiding, the things that create the most obstacles for the cultivation of calm abiding is attachment or mental wandering. And the thing that we become distracted with, the things that our mind wanders to, are objects of desire, desired objects. So for that end, we meditate on impermanence. We meditate on the Four Truths. We think of the nature of phenomena in relation to the Four Truths, and we do that in order to overcome anger and attachment. So if you have overcome anger and attachment, even if you remain in the midst of society in a place that is very busy without attachment, clinging, and so forth, your mind will not be swayed by the busyness of society. Even within remaining in the center of society in a very busy place, if you have understood the impermanent nature of phenomena, how they cannot be relied upon, you will not be affected by this busyness around you. But if you're still affected by this busyness of hustle and bustle of remaining in a place that triggers your attachment and clinging, you can say that it is good to create some isolation, some seclusion, at least physically to begin with, in which those objects do not trigger your afflictive states of mind.
The shini tobi chadan dosa da shini duya di sempre migwala tichi teli da duya da migwala tichi teli kalaya yoncha khanim gozunda ani goba da chiwani ton da kanji ani so chabare so devil de jare da duzu ngod kyoni sem migwala tichi ne matu yon kadule ani kaddu hinaya ani dechala nimbote yandi 아니 신입주기 탑 조지 차려도 왔어라.
So in order to overcome those afflictive states of mind, we cultivate calm abiding. In order to overcome attachment and so forth, we cultivate calm abiding, which is a single-pointed concentration focused on a certain object of observation. So in order to develop that single-pointedness and focusing upon a certain observed object, we deal with the main obstacles, the main hindrances for that single-pointedness of mind. And the main hindrance is attachment, desire. So then in order to cultivate calm abiding, which is that single-pointedness of mind, we antidote attachment. We apply antidotes to attachment, to desire.
Dinamaya driven on song that kitchen book. Lu and bit tam jigging being soda. Troby, dinzus of on said and vacation with the rest. I mean, jigging being long, that's Castle that Namji Jigdemba said 이 다지 김도 송지 아니 어딘지 아니 인지리들이야 좋은 원진 거라서 그 아니 이 맨날 하든지 아니 취업이 아니 퇴송 공성 지역이 주주 능이 주주들도 땅무등이 미 인지리들이 가도 이나로 아니 상로 나눠야지 디 통중의 계속 말했어 그 착당한 초리기 아니 상로다 깨져디 가도에는 용돼야지 그럼 먼저 공부 자산 지나는 거예요 넘니 되잖아요 그게 로봇 상로 로기 장양 넘니디 돌아 상로다 아니 통 추로도 투바이냐 디 돌아 깨져시 디 돌아에 티워트는지 존디기 미망 쇼진 좀바이냐 아니 착당 초리 상로디 망르드에 괜찮게 말했어. 먼저 지대보다 냠든 제옹이 남름 나와이나 지 아니 잡도 총아지 바이나 지대 김보 품다 카타린 데고스 송고다스 백히심 콘트냠 지 제옹이 카트이나 지 감가도 깨져지다 차단 초리 깨져지 아니 가드는 시고요르지 디시에 차이질라 아니 디리아 셈 디초 샘 초치니 아니 지 간지 타만도 용되기도 왔어. 인자 지대비 인시소도 든조소 빵벌세디 아니 지땅이면 든좀 제발이 대규모를 세마인바 그 차단 처리 용사 초대다 아니 가다진 걸세 디레샤스로
In the commentary, it says, hence, through the method of physical isolation, one abandons distractions such as meeting with worldly friends, relatives, and so forth. So, contextualizing the instruction that is given here. If you find yourself in a relationship, certain relationship with your household, with your partner, with your friends, relatives, and so forth, and you're seeking to develop concentration that is calm abiding, it'd be difficult to do it with that framework in which daily you encounter these people and you inevitably end up speaking about the hustle and bustle of this world, object of desire and so forth. It is very difficult to avoid those topics when you have those types of relationship, when you're surrounded by those who are close to your heart. Just difficult to avoid conversations, encounters, topics surrounding the hustle and bustle of the world, objects of desire, clinging, and so forth. So therefore, the instruction is given here that if this is what you seek to develop, the concentration that is calm abiding, then first of all, you need to deal with isolating yourself from those situations. So it is extremely difficult to, then if you think of doing study, reflection, and meditation, which will be uninterrupted, it is difficult to do it in a scenario where you're constantly surrounded by those things. So then comparing it, for example, with monastic communities, such as the one that Geshe came from, studying in a big monastery, where you meet your Dharma friends daily, you go to classes with them, you discuss the Dharma with them, you debate different topics with them. Most of the day, the conversations, when you're meeting with a great degree of people around you, most of the conversations are still about the Dharma, about the subjects that you study together, about the topics that you study together, so that there is a lesser avenue of your interaction with so many different people. There's a lesser avenue for speaking about worldly things or object of desire, attachment, and so forth. There is a lesser avenue for that to occur, right? So it occurs to a much lesser degree. Now, if you still find yourself in kind of a certain busy community situation, but still this community is mainly busy with the Dhamma discussion and so forth, that might not occur. But still, the advice is given, for example, with respect to how the Dhamma communities come together. So there is a community of monastics and together with a community of lay people, men and women. It's still kind of a general advice that is given is that it's good for the monastic community to be a bit removed or more far away from lay community, because there's that idea that if you are going to come across with, as a monastic, with those that live in relationship, in kind of in a community and so forth, it is hard to avoid kind of discussions over things that give rise to attachment, clinging, and so forth. So advice that is generally given is that it's still best to kind of still stay a bit removed, or to stay together as monastics rather to be completely involved in ordinary society or ordinary community. Jason,
Yeah.
Can someone achieve counterparty in the context of, say, like a monastery or like surgery with all the people around you? I wonder is the person that's like going practicing counterparty, their mind's getting a lot more subtle than the people around them. It seems to me that the people around them might be more noticeable to them, even though the person's not interacting with those other people.
Not totally. Are you saying that even within kind of monasteries like Sergio Monastery, where you're surrounded by Dhamma friends, when you're doing a practice of common abiding and your mind becomes subtle, still the people around you are still influencing your mind? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, probably, but if I rephrase it, it seems to me that your mind becomes more subtle as the practice of counterparty is growing. It would become more other people's energy, prominent, and effect on the practitioner in that sort of environment.
So you mean kind of, if your practice of common abiding is becoming more advanced, more prominent, and your mind becomes more subtle, you start noticing more people around you, the energy and so forth. Could that still affect your practice, and that could it still disturb your practice? Tadila, perché la canna vuole di inci che sono tanto sto. Tadila, can bena chasala shine gomba ina rawa. Shine gomba ina che si shine nyamnen di yago chewa ina sem taru dogi was. De kapsulayan so yun la tawa shemba tenso rawa. Peshe jikenge duci to la kecha machina yan konso yoba di samro tanta kare yoba di shika kan yoba di des donan chero di yon sigero was sem chabe kengi. Chezan konso yan kesi sacha den dawochi la shine tingen zingomba ina yan mishemba döbe yu to la kecha machina yan parche dende konso yobe kengi. Pachi yon sigirves.
Hento was. Kuzu yebi togi, the children which do me, teen younger, and Lojonchi, and Georgian Choni, Pento was. Nenga Shiria, Pento was.
In a grande theory, Casey, near Casa someday the gong gab to Dende.
And the so the man said it's so similar rallying us. The Nisam new to some of those.
Well, to begin with, when you study the Dhamma, you need also people around you to discuss the Dhamma with them. You need to be able to discuss the Dhamma, to ask questions and so forth. They also inform your understanding. But then when you're doing a retreat, like for example, a retreat of calm abiding, when that's your main focus, you also need to then, even if there are people around you, you also need to make sure that in your mind, it doesn't affect your mind. So even if you do not find a situation where you're completely removed from those people, still you can make sure that in your mind that your mind is not affected by the presence. So this is also something that you yourself can do in your practice.
예, 나 김에 자상가 들어가들라게 되게 냥냥 소리지. 라, 만도 더바이 나타지 피에 미터 정한 뉴스 미터 자스 상고 미지 깨져와는 소수지 아니 샘레야 포딩이 도지 니쿠야라야 네비 소리지. 소거라스. 이 만도 김에 자상 소원디게 아니 두간들 체계에서 and the Kilaya, Boop Shipchung of Chu, Boop Doya, not Dingy Jago, and Tong Jani, and if we taught the cake and Dumba Shucham shown them what they may make a ship with the chin. Need you shuku to say, Solaya, here's tea, and if those was the semi, but that the none this the also semi, but the Sew shoes Resha, something with Surgu.
Sometimes when we go into a retreat, we have that idea that we need to find some place that is absolutely quiet. If there's someone that is found 50 meters away from you and 100 meters or 100 meters away from you and they still talk, you will hear them and that will disturb your practice. Then Geshe spent some time in Gyumero, in Gyume Monastery, one of the tantric colleges, where monks, after they finished the study, they stayed for about a year in that place and they studied Tantra, and part of the schedule involves a lot of pujas. So monks come together with a lot of playing instruments. So you have all the trumpets, the gyalings and so forth, and all the cymbals, and also everyone recites on top of their voice. But still, so there's kind of I wouldn't say noise, but the sound is kind of very, very strong, and yet some people fall asleep even when that is going on. Kind of the mind is completely at ease, even though there is that cacophony around them. So altogether, it depends upon one's mind. So not only you need to an advice is given here for seeking mental isolation, but you can also be active in making sure that in your mind you do not allow those disturbances to come in. Thank you. We'll leave it here for now. I think I found it. Niruda lama sangye drupine doachi yamalupa te salago pasho Rinpoche mahye pana kigyochi yavanya pane Wame gondo dewa shu Kowe shinkanzen pendar dewa Shabe sinde bada te gyuchi Jinjang Dewe Tenzin Kyong Dewe Konso Doko Chosun Kowe Nemo Tuju Aya Sojuji Konde Shaken. Thank you. Dero. Kan cover sago chimyedo. Ni the da. The award the seniors and manyokono devo yona mina tarjese. Kongola devarwa ne krango chingo insan.
Go chingo shirayo.
Da. 세상 대시
Dicho olarak. Dam shows dam.
Veggie this child such a
Re. Chel sochu. Re.
I'm not sure at the moment, but we are. So I'm still trying to going forward. To do online.
라
Dimdosa.
일어나서 방이 바로
Testam. Testam. Consider.
아
The. Qu'est-ce que je te dis, non?
Veggie demonstrates some of it isn't it just so kind of some of the 신여와 견하나 직체 그런 진여와이나 처로든 그런 믹스하게 저도
Re. Yes.
And adjust the size for a while.
yeah you need to kind of bend the metal. So the ones have massive heads. So.
Geshe says he has a smaller.
Sorry?
We don't want to give them.
Yes, learn. Check.
You can put in a comment. So if it's for something in particular, then that's what comes. If you were to no, so it's not big.
Changman.
Yeah, well, yeah, so.
Choose Jackson, the choose a chain, the 그냥 서너들 치글라 기았다 기압추 기았던 둔추로 미역은 그런데 뭐
But it's now treated really distinct from bioscience. I'm not sure it's totally portrait of it. Yes. So maybe if you do
다시 안에 주고
What is the
sorry.
what are the results of tests?
So Geshe had to kind of make it really big because it says it kind of it made it really big and it seems like it could work.
So it will be good.
Yes, it's okay. But I'm just wondering what this go.
You might need to go to see a doctor and ask the doctor to chip some of his skull to make it smaller. To squeeze it.
Yeah, no, but I think maybe if to put somewhere to just, you
Yeah,
know what
yeah.
I mean, like to sometimes, you know.
Yeah, to
you-
bend.
to
Yeah, to
bend.
bend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's like become more,
Yeah, that's what Geshe did. It just kind of tried to bend it as much as
Yeah.
possible.
okay, so we will buy them. Okay, thank you. Okay, so
All right.
maybe one day we could test them on the computer.
Yeah.
One day will be good.
Okay. So test on my computer meaning that connected to the mixer.
Yeah, so it
Yeah.
will take us longer time. It could take even 1 hour. It depends. It could be like immediately good.
Yeah.
Or I will, because with the ASA we spent like 3
Yeah,
hours. But now I know what to do.
Okay.
So I have notes. So I don't know what I would do because it could like take 20 minutes, but it could take also 1 hour. It depends, if everything would be good or not.
We can, since I have something on Saturday, we can try on Sunday
Okay.
or we can try on Monday
Okay, so something like
or
this.
Friday.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
cool.
So I will contact you and then you will tell me.
No worries.
Yeah, because Friday after teachings is a good day. Or
Yeah.
you will be here already. Or
Okay.
no, because I don't know much. So I will not.
Sorry.
Okay. So anyway, it's not our decision.
So let's see if tomorrow is Friday. Let's see what we do afternoon, and if you want to try it out, you come here.
Tomorrow afternoon, but straight after the teachings or later?
Let me think about it. Okay.
Okay. So
Cool.
next week. Okay.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you need to zoom in a little bit?
Yes, you can.
Where's the button for that?
So now you would like to make it.
Well, just because it's, if you have a look.
Yeah.
It's just like if you want to zoom in a little bit on
Yeah.
somebody.
So
what do you
look
do?
here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So here you put, make it as you would like.
Yeah.
As you can concentrate.
Yeah. So Chucky's going to need to be there.
I'm joking because you're looking for joking.
Yes, the Chucky's
So
there.
you are setting it